bring up Zach Ruzycki, our Director of Resource Planning. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Tim, his staff, all of you for making time this morning to come out here and listen. I'm going to make sure that I leave time for a good amount of Q&A today, because I think we have some really interesting things to talk about, the decisions that we make as an organization, why we make those, and where it's led us to this point and why. So like Jeff said, Zach Ruzycki, Director of Resource Planning at GRE. Our group at GRE focuses on long-term planning and strategy. Okay, so we're thinking 10, 15, 20 plus years in the future. All right, and how does that fit with our portfolio of today? And where do we want to be tomorrow? So we've got a great story to tell. Organizationally, GRE, our members and our board have been making forward-looking decisions for quite some time now. Over a decade, we've been planning for the future of where we are today. There's a lot of change in our industry. You've heard Derek talk about it. You've heard Pretty talk about it. I'm going to speak about it a little bit from the power supply side, but we're in an industry that's experiencing technological change, economic change that's impacted by socioeconomic effects, that's impacted by the economy. So there are a lot of different pressures when we think about the power systems and how we plan to serve energy and demand moving forward. Our portfolio is very diverse today. We have a strong capacity position, so the backbone of our portfolio is built with natural gas peaking generators. We have 1,400 megawatts of those on our system today. We also have a firm capacity contract with Rainbow Energy, who purchased Coal Creek Station from GRE in 2020, and I'll talk about that more later. We also have hydro in our portfolio, and our energy that we produce that serves our membership is predominantly produced from wind, and it will be going forward. And there's a difference between energy and capacity. Energy is the energy product to use, so the kilowatt hours that you're using when you flip the light switch in your house. The capacity is the potential resources that can produce energy on the system. So our peaking units, I talked about 1,400 megawatts of those don't produce much energy for us. They only run 2-3% of the time because they're needed when the system needs them the most. Okay, and we're going to get into reliability this morning as well. Our member resources are also an asset to GRE and our membership. We have a renewable member resource option that allows our members to self-supply up to 10% of their energy and demand with renewable resources, and we have a very robust demand-side management portfolio that Jeff and his team run within GRE. That includes energy efficiency, demand response, and a number of other member-sided resources that's going to become a larger part of our portfolio moving forward. We're also members of MISO. MISO is the independent system operator. Imagine just a big pool of energy. It's the energy market in the Midwest. You can see the blue map here. It's a very large footprint. And that is where the independent system operator, MISO, they are the ones who send the price signals to dispatch power plants. They are the regional transmission operator. We have to comply with regulations and rules as a member of MISO and provide a certain amount of capacity every year. So our power supply portfolio, this is a map. The creation of a portfolio, of a power supply portfolio, is kind of an art and a science. And there's a lot of things that go into the decisions that we make. There are economic decisions that go into it. There are policy decisions that go into it. There are risks that you take when you're creating a portfolio. It's just like creating a portfolio in your 401k or in your investment account. Okay, you don't want to be too overexposed to one type of resource. You don't want to have too many things in one sector. Okay, we want to be diverse. And we're diverse by resource and we're diverse geographically. And those are two very powerful things. You can see the wind that we have, the large green dots out in North Dakota and southern Minnesota. Those are producing a lot of energy for us. Those are great areas of energy production for wind. Our natural gas peaking facilities are in southern Minnesota and in eastern Minnesota. Those are dual fuel capable assets. You can see that the bubble color is purple and blue, which indicates that those units are capable of burning fuel oil as well as natural gas. And that dual fuel capability is extraordinarily important to us during times of reliability need. Okay, if we can't get natural gas, or if natural gas is incredibly expensive, those units can burn fuel oil instead and continue to serve the grid and its reliability needs. That's something that's really important because we've seen that happen in winter reliability events in the past. You know, you hear people talk a lot about California battery storage and a lot of things like that. Minnesota is very different. You know, we up here, we know that our reliability events that we're concerned about happen in the winter a lot of the time, right? There are 2-3 days in February where it's negative 30 degrees instead of 3 or 4 hours in LA when it's 105. So we have to think about multi-day reliability events. And the ability for our units to dispatch when they're needed and to run is valuable. We've transitioned away from fossil fuels, from coal, right? We get a lot of questions as to why that is. And like I said at the beginning of this slide, there are a lot of reasons for the decisions that we make. We've done that primarily for economic reasons. The transition to wind has been one that's driven by the economics of those resources and the cost of the energy production. The pivot away from coal with the sale of Coal Creek Station and the retirement of Stanton Station in 2020 and 17 respectively, those were decisions that were again driven by the economics of those units. They weren't providing value to the membership in the way that they had been for the previous 20 or 30 years, and so we made a decision to move away from those. That decision is one that is, from our rate projections, going to contribute to ongoing rate stability towards the future. We have different types of resources for different needs. I talked about natural gas. You can see here the colored bars represent each season within MISO. And MISO evaluates utilities' ability to meet reliability requirements by season: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And this is new, and I'll talk about this very briefly here coming up. But you can see how the different resources are accredited or given credit for the capacity they provide differently in each season. What you'll notice is that gas is very firm, right? In every season, winter, spring, summer, fall, we can receive a high amount of capacity accreditation, and it doesn't change much. In fact, we get even more capacity from these resources in the winter because these units run more efficiently when the air is cold. The air is more dense, we get better power production out of the units. For wind produces better in the winter, so we get more capacity accreditation from those resources in the winter. Hydro, we have a diversity exchange contract, so it's kind of funny, but we have to send 200 megawatts out in the winter. We get that capacity back in the summer and the fall, so that's a benefit to us on a seasonal basis. That's an exchange contract with Manitoba Hydro. We also have a number of contract purchases that provide firm capacity year-round, as well as our Rainbow contract. The Rainbow contract came about when we sold Coal Creek Station to Rainbow Energy. As part of that agreement, we asked and signed an agreement with Rainbow that we would get capacity and energy off of that unit for a period of 10 years after the sale. And that steps down over time. For the first year, we took basically the full amount of the station in terms of capacity and energy. Then it stepped down to 550 megawatts. Then it's going to step down to 350 megawatts in the next year or two, and that will remain at that level until 2031. That's a great thing for us and for our members because it provides two things. It provides a fixed price energy hedge to the market because we're paying a flat fixed price on that contract, and it provides us with capacity that allows us to transition away from these coal resources, Stanton and Coal Creek Station. While we bring in new resources to our portfolio, we let technology develop that will allow for more cost-effective transition away from those resources. We've put ourselves in a really good position in terms of the transition that we're making, the decisions that GRE has made in the last 5 years associated with our energy transition, the acquisitions of renewable energy, and how we've dealt with our existing fossil fuel technologies. Those decisions that we made, that our board and our membership made in the last 5 years, those are decisions that are currently facing other utilities in the state and the region today, right? And those decisions get harder and harder and harder as time goes on. So the early action that we took are really paying off and benefiting our membership today. Our capacity resources, this is a snapshot of spring, summer, fall, and winter. We plan by planning year. So in MISO tells the utilities that are members of MISO, each year you shall have this much capacity. You need to carry this much capacity, and if you don't, you need to pay to get that capacity from what's called the clearing auction in MISO. So every year, utilities submit all their resources into MISO, and MISO evaluates what types of resources there are, what accreditation they have, and how they contribute to what's called a planning reserve margin, which is the level required to ensure reliable service in MISO. In a timely fashion, MISO just came out with the results from the planning reserve auction for this year, this morning and yesterday. And what we see is very different from last year. Last year, you may recall that there was a tight capacity situation that increased the cost of capacity and indicated that there was some shortfall in MISO. This year is very much the opposite of that. In all 4 seasons, MISO sees a surplus of resources, and the capacity prices that we see in this planning year are extraordinarily low compared to where they have been. So that's a good thing, right? That's economics at work. We got a pretty hefty price signal last year, and MISO has responded, and the members of MISO have responded with more resources this year. The seasonal construct, I spoke about that a little bit earlier. This goes to reliability. Right? And we all think about reliability. It's at the top of our mind as a utility. It's at the top of a lot of your minds too, as to how do we serve our load and how do we make sure the lights stay on. We're transitioning quickly as an industry from fossil fuels to renewable energy resources. And that transition is one that can't just happen with blindfolds on and assume that the same types of resources that we've had in smaller quantities can increase and serve load the same way that dispatchable resources have in the past. They can't. Today, it would be extremely impractical and economically inefficient to have a 100% renewable energy system. Engineering-wise, it would be very difficult, and from a cost perspective, it would be exponentially more expensive. MISO understands this. We've been working with MISO for several years now on a seasonal construct that will allow for better accreditation of resources. And what this means is that you get different credit for different types of resources. Right? When I talked about gas earlier, if you have a 100-megawatt gas generator, you probably get close to 100 megawatts of credit for having that in MISO. So that's contributing to what we have to provide to MISO. If you have 100 megawatts of wind, under this new construct, we're probably getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% credit for that wind resource. Now, in the winter time, that changes. You get more accreditation for wind in the winter, so on average across the year, wind is a beneficiary of the seasonal construct. Solar is the opposite. Okay, I think we all understand that previously MISO was evaluating reliability on a summer peak basis. Now we're looking at reliability in every season of the year. Solar was able to provide capacity and service at the time of peak summer needs, so it was accredited at a very high level previously, 75%. Today, in the winter, that has dropped all the way down to perhaps 5 to 10%. And so what that means is that if you're in the business of building resources, if you're looking at what assets do I want to invest in to serve load, solar gives you less bang for your buck now, very much so, than it used to. And that impacts investment decisions, that impacts how we think about planning our system, and it really underscores the value of the existing resources that we have on the system today, our gas assets. Our future energy production, you can see here we have a very large margin of renewable energy providing our energy that we're serving to our membership. We have contracts, and that represents the rainbow contract, and then the blue bar are market purchases. And that's basically if we're providing X amount of energy, but we have a slightly higher amount of energy demand, we can go to the market and purchase that out of MISO. Now, we never purposely plan to be short to MISO. We always provide more resources than we are required to in MISO, but during times of the year where perhaps energy production may dip from renewables, we can go to the market, purchase some energy, and treat the market essentially as a giant battery. And that's one of the benefits of being in an ISO RTO like MISO. Pretty showed a slide similar to this in her last presentation. Our energy transition is very pronounced when you look at this. 57% of our energy came from coal in 2021. By 2027, that same 57% margin will come from wind. The Rainbow contract provides 24% of our energy. We have natural gas providing a small amount, as well as our market exposure in hydro resources. This energy transition has been one that's been driven by economics, primarily. Okay, the transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy has been one that has been brought about by the cost declines that we've seen from wind and how that can serve our membership. All of our wind contracts are long-term fixed-price contracts, which means that we're paying a flat rate that doesn't increase over time, and that locks in a price that provides us with a hedge to the market. So the way that we think about our portfolio is every resource that we buy, that we build, is simply a hedge to the market. If we need to serve 8 million megawatt hours of energy annually to our membership, and we have resources that can produce 9 million megawatt hours of energy annually, depending on where those resources are located, we are hedging our exposure to the MISO market. So the revenues that we're receiving from our generating assets are offsetting the load costs of purchasing the energy that we need to serve our members out of MISO. Wind is an energy hedge, and it's a huge resource for our portfolio, and you can see from this transition, and I apologize because the numbers are a little bit difficult to read at the top, but in 2005 we had only 144 megawatts of wind. By 2018 that had grown to 650, and by 2025 that's going to be more than 1,800 megawatts. These contracts are very flexible for us. We've been able to negotiate some very creative deals. As part of the Coal Creek Station sale, we negotiated the use of the HVDC line that used to connect Coal Creek Station to the Twin Cities area. It still does, but we're carving out a portion of that to deliver 400 megawatts of wind straight to the Twin Cities area. That does a number of things for us. One, it's knocking out a lot of the geographic differences between price. So if you're building a wind project in North Dakota, say the prices in North Dakota were $15 a megawatt hour below the prices in Minnesota, you were taking a haircut there on what we call congestion, and that spread between prices. So if we were generating 2 million megawatt hours of wind at $15 in North Dakota, but then having to buy 2 million megawatt hours of load in Minnesota at $25, you're losing out there because of that geographic spread in pricing differences. Using the HVDC line allows us to knock that out and deliver wind and get paid basically what we're paying for load. So that's a huge benefit for us as part of the sale. We also are leveraging our existing gas infrastructure to surplus interconnect and basically piggyback off of our gas units interconnections into MISO to deliver our wind energy to help us satisfy our carbon-free standard requirements under new state law. We've heard a little bit about this long-duration storage resource. GRE is working with Form Energy on a long-duration storage asset. This is not a large project. All right, it's not a huge part of our portfolio. It's a pilot project to see how this technology might contribute to our portfolio needs in the future. We know, and I talked about a few minutes ago, we have multi-day reliability events. Okay, so a 4-hour lithium-ion storage resource doesn't do a whole lot of good when we have 72 hours of reliability needs and high prices in the market. Neither does 8 or 12 hours. This resource is a 100-hour asset. It's developed by Form Energy, a company based in Massachusetts, and it's located at our Cambridge peaking station. So what we want to be able to show with this project is that maybe this technology can contribute to an energy landscape in the future that we're moving quickly towards. We've heard from a couple of people today the transition in MISO away from dispatchable resources towards more renewables. We're still going to have a need for dispatchable resources, but as we get more and more renewables on the system, we're going to need more flexibility in how we can serve load when those resources fluctuate. And 100-hour storage is something that can move that energy around at a much more beneficial time scale than a 4, 8, or even 12-hour resource can. I won't spend too much time on this because Derek did a great job summarizing the carbon-free standard, but this is it's not an easy target to meet. But like I talked about at the beginning, GRE and our members have put us on a path to compliance with this years before this policy was even considered at the legislature. We've been planning for a carbon-constrained future as part of our organizational goals since 2010. And we've been taking action since 2010, understanding that in the future we were more likely than not to receive either state or federal policy changes that impacted our ability to continue operating with the portfolio that we had at that time. All right, so those decisions have paid off. We were able to secure wind in the last 5 or 6 years at rates that are less than half of what they are on the market today. If we had waited and been a policy taker instead of a maker of our own destiny, so to say, we would have been in a very different cost perspective today, buying wind at $50, $55 a megawatt hour instead of the contractual purchases that we've made in the last 5 years in the high teens, low 20s, and mid 20s a megawatt hour. You simply can't find wind for the prices that we've locked in today. This goal isn't easy, but it's a policy that we can work with. and it's pragmatic. Derek talked a lot about the RECs, the use of RECs, the ability for us to still use our gas plants, the ability for us to still participate in MISO. These were absolute must-haves for GRE and for co-ops around the state. And to their credit, the legislature did listen to what we had to say. And they allowed us the ability to continue using these critical dispatchable resources for reliability and to continue to access the MISO market, which creates a very strong economic benefit for our membership when we need to. So our move to a renewable heavy portfolio has been driven mostly by cost and by policy risk mitigation. We've increased our renewable member resource options, but we do have a challenging environment for development. And again, this is a benefit of the early action that we've taken, is that the wind that we've contracted for that's already online is not facing some of the permitting and development challenges that some of our later wind is. And we see this happening, and it's a very challenging situation. It's a challenging policy situation from a permitting perspective, being able to permit new wind resources, getting their certificates of need from the Public Utilities Commission, getting the transmission routes that these resources need to deliver energy to the system approved, and then even from a commodities perspective. The cost of building new wind, building new solar, are extraordinarily high today, and those are being driven by supply chain challenges, inflationary pressures. I just mentioned we were seeing wind contracting in the low 20s in 2020-21. We just had some meetings last week with wind developers that are offering wind at $50 a megawatt hour. Right, so we've seen more than double the cost of renewable energy in the last 3 years. And we're now returning to pricing levels that we saw when the original Next Generation Energy Act was passed in Minnesota in 2008. We were contracting wind in the $40, $50 range then. We saw a huge change in the industry to provide lower cost renewables. Now that's completely reversed. And we're seeing wind at $50, solar at $70. Luckily, we don't have to make those investment decisions today because we've already done those things. We just filed an integrated resource plan with the Public Utilities Commission about a month ago that indicates our future path. In a way, having a boring resource plan is a good thing because we don't have anything exciting that we have to do in the next 5 or 10 years because we've already done it. All right, so our next resource that we had coming to the portfolio is a capacity resource. In this case, it was modeled as a storage asset. That doesn't mean that's what we're going to do, but the model that we used represented this capacity need as storage. So that's a 200 megawatt storage or capacity need in 2020. 2031, we have another capacity need represented in this case by solar, and then 2032, some energy that we need. And that energy is predominantly required as that rainbow contract rolls off and as our energy and demand forecasts increase over time. But there's a huge difference, and we hear people talk about the carbon-free standard in Minnesota, and even, as I've said today, we're on a path to compliance today. Our portfolio today should comply with the 2030 and 2035 milestones of the standard as it is today, with no additional action. But there's a difference between planning to comply and actually complying. And those differences are the challenges that we face in bringing these resources to the system. So working with Greater Minnesota, working through challenges in permitting, where we need these resources and when we need them is critical to actually bring them online to comply with the standards that we have to face. We have to have some really tough conversations. We've talked with regulators, we've talked with policymakers, with legislators, with folks in outstate Minnesota, local government officials, as we try and bring these resources on. These partnerships are really important, and Pretty talked about the need for permitting for transmission. We need Greater Minnesota, we need North Dakota, we need South Dakota, we need Iowa to be able to make this work, right? So the conversations that we have need to be productive, and they have been to this point, but there's still work to do. But we feel like we're in a good position. Our portfolio planning has been proactive. It's been driven by economics and reliability, and I'm happy to take any questions now with the time that we have left.